As world leaders leave a crucial climate summit in Glasgow, Scotland, it's now time for diplomats to negotiate pledges made during the conference. Many nations committed to reducing emissions, shifting away from coal, and eliminating deforestation by 2030. But some environmental groups remain skeptical about these promises, as there's no way to hold nations accountable or force action. For more, I want to bring in Dr. Sweta Chakraborty. She's a climate change expert and president of We Don't Have Time US. Thank you for being here. So what do you make of the pledges made at this climate summit?
We've come a long way since the Paris Accords. Those pledges only brought us 80% of the way to keep warming below 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Where we are right now in terms of the pledges get us all the way there to 1.8 degrees Celsius maximum warming by the end of the century. Of course, we know from science that we don't want to be anywhere more than 1.5. So we're still not at the optimum max out level for the end of the century, but we're better than we were. There's a huge amount of work to be done still, but the pledges are moving in the right direction. We're seeing no more coal-fired power plants that are being supported abroad. And we need to see countries like China and India actually promise to stop the development of these coal-fired power plants domestically for them. So if we see that actually implemented, now we're going to go a long way in meeting that pledge.
That's what I wanted to ask you more about that, Sweta, because as you say, several nations announced that they're intending to phase out coal in the next 20 years or 10 years in some cases. How big of an impact do you expect that this will have on global warming?
This is huge. Coal is what we need to get rid of first and foremost. Of course, oil and gas is important. And all of these are fossil fuels, which contribute to carbon emissions and methane emissions that result in the planet warming. So if we can phase out coal, oil, and gas, now we're talking about really getting to that renewable transition to clean energy that is going to usher in that brighter, cleaner future that we keep talking about, that we want to look forward to globally. And so coal is a big step forward in getting that done. A lot of countries are still highly dependent on coal. More than 50% of coal consumption still happens in China, followed by India. And the US is still in the single digits of coal consumption. So once these largest emitters of carbon pollution, these 3 countries that I just stated, get rid of coal, we are much further along on that transition to renewable. And that's critical.
But there were obviously some notable absences among the countries that are crucially important, including President Xi Jinping of China, Vladimir Putin of Russia, and Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil. How much do these countries contribute to global emissions, and what are they doing to try and fight this climate crisis?
These countries not being present is not sending a strong signal to the country head delegations from around the world that have gathered. And that is not a good signal generally for the world, that there's going to be the rollout that's needed collectively to see global warming, see these pledges through, and global warming kept under that 1.5 degrees threshold that, again, scientists have unanimously said is the max point of warming we can withstand before we globally experience runaway climate change, which is a reality we don't wish on our worst enemies. And so having these countries that are notably high polluters absent from these negotiations is a massive disappointment, is a signal being sent that the blueprints aren't there, the implementation isn't there yet. The pledges might be there. We've heard from China that they will be going net neutral by 2060. We've heard from Saudi Arabia and Russia similar promises. But we need to see how that's actually going to happen. The hard work starts after COP26. We need to see exactly how these countries plan to transition from their current usage of fossil fuels into renewable energy sources. That is going to be, despite these countries not being present at COP26, what the world looks at in terms of determining whether or not these pledges will actually result in some sort of reality.
And Sweta, poorer countries have been hit with some of the most serious consequences of climate change, as you're well aware. During the summit, did any conversations actually produce fruit when it came to the question of wealthier countries helping them out? We know that even for wealthier countries, trying to get them to do their own share comes at an enormous cost that sometimes is difficult to get them to pay for in and of itself.
Sure. We have been looking to create a global green climate fund that funnels $100 billion annually to support vulnerable countries to develop the resiliency they need in the face of climate change impacts and to be able to adapt to a warmer world. This is something that was established years ago. Unfortunately, in the United States, when Trump became president, the commitments to this green climate fund were not upheld. With Biden as president of the United States currently, the promise has been made that the U.S. will contribute $3 billion annually to this $100 billion pot to support these vulnerable countries. We're going to need much more than that. And vulnerable countries represented at COP26 have made that very clear. $100 billion is the ask from years ago. What is the most realistic ask now? Well, the point is that this commitment's being made. It's been promised to for $100 billion. The U.S. has promised the $3 billion. That is something very positive and in the right direction coming out of COP so far. But is it enough? Is $100 billion from 6 years ago the reality of what is needed now? We probably need much, much, much more than that. But again, it's a step in the right direction to support vulnerable countries who did not contribute what they are getting in return from the impact of climate change.
All right, Dr. Sweta Chakraborty, thank you for joining.
Thank you.